You are fake news.
We all know that the news ecosystem is broken. Echo chambers and fake news, corporate and political control over the media, all these issues make it extremely hard to get unbiased information and different perspectives. But there's a new app out there called News Voice, and it's revolutionising the way we read news. News Voice aggregates all the major news sites, as well as international and independent media in a personalised news feed. Each news story shows multiple sources, which are all clearly tagged with their bias and perspective. For the first time ever, there's a completely open and democratised platform for news. You can download it from the app stores or from the link in the description. It's for both Android and iOS, and it's free. Get it now. Last Friday, there was an Islamic terror attack in the centre of my hometown, Melbourne. A Somalian-born Muslim living in the northwest of Melbourne loaded his car full of barbecue gas bottles, crashed it in the middle of Bourke Street in Melbourne CBD, then got out and started attacking people with a knife, killing one and injuring 3 others.
So me and my managers ran out, see what happened. Obviously see the car on fire, and took a step closer. Turns out there was an old man. There was a lot of blood on him. Just laying on the floor face down, and there was people trying to help him out. So yeah, I was really in shock, didn't know what to do. And they were obviously giving him CPR. His face was just in a pool of blood. When they turned him over, I'm pretty sure he's been stabbed in the face. After that, we just saw 2 police officers kind of in a hassle with the man wielding the knife. They were pretty close to each other, so yeah, this guy was wielding his knife towards the police officers. Looked like he could have gotten the police officers pretty good, but they eventually tasered him and shot him.
The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the Bourke Street attack. Here's what our Prime Minister had to say about it.
We would be kidding ourselves if we did not call out the fact that the greatest threat of religious extremism in this country is the radical and dangerous ideology of extremist Islam. There is a special responsibility on religious leaders to protect their religious communities and to ensure that dangerous teachings and ideologies do not take root here.
Now, Anne Ali is a Member of Parliament from Western Australia. She's a Muslim and a so-called counter-terrorism expert. Here's what she had to say on the matter during an interview on Sky News.
I think the Prime Minister needs to do a little bit of Terrorism 101 before he starts talking in short phrases and catchphrases, and know what he's talking about before he starts dividing communities and pointing fingers at radical Islam.
The guy crashed his car full of gas bottles into a crowded city street, then got out and started stabbing people while shouting Allahu Akbar. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the attack, but the Prime Minister needs to do some Terrorism 101 before he starts pointing his fingers at radical Islam. Bitch, are you fucking retarded?
Yes, violent jihadism has been the predominant aspect of the religious wave of terrorism, to speak about the past 40 years or so. Is it the biggest threat here in Australia in terms of violence and victims of violence? The biggest victims of violence in Australia aren't victims of violent terrorism. They are victims of domestic violence.
He was addressing yet another Islamic terrorist attack that had just occurred.
So when we talk about what is the biggest threat to Australia in terms of violence, in terms of individual safety and well-being,
he was talking about an Islamic terrorist attack that had just occurred.
We need to look at all forms of violence. And when we look at all forms of violence, violence perpetrated by violent jihadists or radical Islam, as the Prime Minister wants to put it, pales in comparison to the number of women who are being killed every week in domestic and partner violence.
So in the wake of this Islamic terrorist attack, you think the Prime Minister should have said something along the lines of, "Very sad what happened in Bourke Street yesterday, and as your Prime Minister, I think the blame falls squarely on the shoulders of men. Men need to respect women." Just as a side note, no women were harmed in the Bourke Street attack. Now, Anne Ali did try to walk back her comments after she got a ton of flack, but she wasn't the only Muslim leader who spoke out on the issue.
Islamic leaders say the PM's remarks are irresponsible. He should apologise for using the Muslim community as a scapegoat. Karanda Sayed is the Executive Director of the Forum on Australia's Islamic Relations. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
You're demanding an apology. Why? Educate us. Tell us what you do to dob in radicals in your community.
Can I first start off by just condemning these terrible attacks, and our heartfelt sympathies are with the Malaspina family and the other victims of this attack. So the whole country was in shock by what they saw on Friday afternoon. Something in broad daylight in the middle of Melbourne. It's just unfathomable and unbelievable.
Yeah, but it's not unfathomable and it's not unbelievable, because the last 10 terror attacks in Australia have been at the hands of radical Muslims.
I can understand how we're all feeling at the moment and the emotions are high, but our community and our organisation and the Muslim community in general have been bending over backwards to assist authorities in various, I suppose, campaigns and activities to address, issues around radicalisation of Muslim youth, particularly with young people who've been brainwashed by these terrible online videos and propaganda videos by ISIS. And so we do a lot. And I think that the comments made by the Prime Minister are irresponsible, and let's call this out for what it really is. It's political expediency, and it's timely to try and create a wedge between the Muslim community and the broader community.
This guy thinks the Prime Minister made the comments that he made for political expediency, that they are timely because we have a federal election coming up, and being mean to the Muslims somehow helps his chances of winning the election, not because there was just a fucking Islamic terror attack.
But the reality is we should be uniting the community together to fight all forms of extremism, and particularly to assist the police in the wonderful work that they do.
But what are Muslim leaders actually doing to be? You say they're doing a lot. If a young person is at a mosque, perhaps talking about doing something, committing an act of terror, are Muslim leaders doing enough to combat that very rare threat of Islamic radicalisation?
This is why the Prime Minister's comments are out of line, and I think that it's a shame, because it really undermines the great work that we've been doing. For example, I'll just give you just a short list, because there are so many things that the Muslim community has been doing, particularly our imams, the leaders of the mosques. They have a very special role, and they are at the front line of addressing this issue of radicalisation. And so there is only a handful, a very small minority of people who are affected by the propaganda of these online organisations. Now, the imams mentor young people. They assist the police in talking to people who have been identified as being radicalised, and they mentor them. They give them guidance to bring them back to the correct interpretations and the ideas that Islam teaches about peace.
Funny little world in my mixed up brain, drinking too much piss, getting fried again. Weekend's coming up in a couple of days, I'm gonna get fucked up.
Notice he says they help police talk to people who have been identified as being radicalised. Identified by who? Is it the police who must identify them first, or are you identifying them to the police?
So they don't dob them into authorities, though. They just try and mentor them out of that thinking.
Oh no, of course. In many instances, there have been where someone's been identified as being extreme or at risk. The mosques, the imams working there, or the community members will actually identify them and then talk to the police about them.
Where someone's been identified as being extreme or at risk, the imams or the community members will identify them and talk to the police about them. Yeah, still seems a bit slippery to me. We want to know whether or not the Muslim community are identifying extremists to the police prior to the police being aware of them. In any case, whether or not this is happening, the Prime Minister absolutely did the right thing by calling the situation as he sees it. So you can shove your apology up your ass. As expected, Twitter has in fact unpersoned me again, so make sure you subscribe to me over at minds.com/bearing. Cheerio.
Recession, recession. Give me better days, give me better days. Recession, recession.